So we're on Daf Kuf Amud Aleph, 2/3 of the way down. And the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, Nosin Aleim Chumrei, Kohanim v'Chumrei Yisraelim. So we have the case of a Suffolk Kohen, Suffolk Yisrael, and he gets the Chumras of both. Lamai Hilchasa, with regard to which dinim did the Mishnah establish, impose upon him the Chumras of a Kohen and the Chumras of Yisrael. Rapapa Leminchasam. We have a case of a karba mincha, and we're going to have to impose the chumrei kohanim and the chumrei Yisraelim. When a Yisrael brings a karba mincha, then you require kmitza. And that kmitza is what goes on the mizbeach and aktar. The shirayim beyond the kmitza, that which is left after the kmitza, that's eaten by the Kohen. So that's as far as Minchas Yisrael is concerned. Minchas Kohen has a special thing, and there's no kmitza, it's kula krev al gabi mizbeach. And this is based on the pasuk of Vayikra Vav, Tezayin, v'chol Minchas Kohen kolil tia lo seyacha. So therefore there's no kmitza, because the whole purpose of the kmitza is to be matter the shirayim, and there's no heter to feel shirayim. And therefore, the bottom line is, that's what the Torah means, that Minchas Kohen is kolil, completely burnt on the Mizbeach. Omar Rav Papa, L'minchasam, shenikmetzes k'minchas Yisrael, v'eina necheles k'minchas Kohen. So we're okay as far as the kmitza is concerned, because again, even though a Minchas Kohen does not require kmitza, but even in the case of a Minchas Yisrael, the kmitza is nikteres. It's burnt on the Mizbeach. So we're already, so to speak, halfway on the road to accomplish the kulo kolil of the Minchas Kohen. However, now after the kmitza, we're left with a bind as far as the shirayim is concerned, because now that tarovis of children, and we don't know if his father was the Kohen or the Yisrael. And now the Tarovis is bringing a karba mincha, which requires kmitza, k'minchas Yisrael. That's the chumrah that we have to impose upon him, because he might be Yisrael. But we cannot allow the shirayim of the mincha to be eaten in the way of minchas Yisrael, the shirayim of which is eaten by zichrei gruna, because here he might be a Kohen. And if he's a Kohen, then his mincha is kreva kolif. So therefore, what are we going to do with this mincha? We don't know exactly the status of the mincha, and the nafkamina is going to be the shirayim, because if it's a minchas Yisrael, the shirayim is nechol l'zuchrei kuna. If it's a minchas Kohen, then it's kulo kolil. So what we do is hakometz karev bifnei atzmo. Fine, that's wonderful, because mimanaf shach, whether it's a Minchas Yisrael or Minchas Kohen, the kmitza needs krev al gabi mizbeach. But what do we do with the shirayim? Shirayim krevim bifnei atzmon lemizbeach. Now, this is a real problem, because on the tzad that he is a Yisrael, the shirayim have to be eaten by zichrei kuna. How could you be makar if we have an Isur lav doraisa of Baal Taktiru? That's what the Gemara is going to ask now. Ikri Khan, on this pasuk, he called Sior, called Vashlo Saktiru Mimenu, Iche Lashem, the Chachamim Darshan, from the extra word Mimenu, and this is a Gemara in Sokach of Gimel, that Kol Shemimenu La Ishim, Areu Baal Taktiru. Any carbon that we would knock there, part of the carbon that's roy like the shirayim are subject to an Isur Baal Taktiru. You're not allowed to be maktir the shirayim. No, it's not just that the shirayim are eaten to zichrei kuna, it's much beyond that. It's a violation of if we're maktir the shirayim. So how could we maktir the shirayim of the mincha here, when on the tzad that it's a minchas Yisrael, we violate the principle and the law of kol shimenu leishim, harei b'bal taktiru. So we're really in a bind. We're not allowed to be mocked to the Shirayim. We'll violate the Baal Taktiru. So here's where the Gemara is going to introduce a concept called Amar Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rav Shimon Pasi. The Masechet, the word Masechet means we bring them up, meaning up on the Mizbeach. L'shum eitzim. What does that mean, l'shum eitzim? When the Kohen is going to be makriv the shirayim of this mincha on the Mizbeach, he's going to make a tanat. If this is a minchas Yisrael, then of course there's an Isur Bal Taktiru Kol Mimenu Le'ishim, and therefore we're not allowed to burn them on the Mizbeach. His kavod is not to be maktir for the purpose of Haktorah, but rather ke'etzim bi'alma. So we're going to bring now a carbon eitzim on that tonight that it's minchas Yisrael. Again, if it's a minchas Kohen, there's no problem whatsoever. You can be maktir it because it's kulo kolil. But on the tzad that it's a minchas Yisrael, we're going to have to be maktir the shirayim as a carbon eitzim. And it would seem from this Gemara that a carbon eitzim, on the one hand, does have a kiyum of hakrava, but it's a fundamentally different kind of kiyum hakrava in such a way that there's no violation of Bal Taktiru. Now, alternatively, the Gemara might be suggesting that Bal Taktiru only applies when he has a kavana for the sake of Haktorah of that which is nechal l'zichrei kohuna. So it means that we have a carbon that there was already a Haktorah on that which is royal Haktorah, and that's the kmitza. But as far as the balance of the mincha, that is included in this Isur Bal Taktiru, but that's only assuming that there's a Haktorah. Haktorah means that his kavana is l'shem Haktorah. But if it's l'shem eitzim, although that's also a kiyum on the Mizbeach, but it's not Haktorah, and this reflects the shita of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar is going to be matir, making this kind of a tanai. And now the Gemara is going to search for the source from which we derive that Rabbi Elazar, and not the Chachamim, but Rabbi Elazar, would be matir, making this tanai. And we'll soon see that the Rabbanim disagree with Rabbi Elazar, but the Gemara is going to have to figure out a solution to this problem according to the Rabbanim. But right now we're focused on Rabbi Elazar. The Sanya we learned in a Brisa. Let's give a little bit of an introduction, a background to this Brisa. We're talking about Chatos and Ola. We're talking about the Evarim of a Chatos that got mixed up with the Evarim of an Ola. And now we have an Isur Haktorah regarding this mixture, because the law is that every Chatos are Asurim B'Haktorah because of the principle of Kol Shemimenu Le'ishim that we learned earlier. He already was maktir those parts of the Chatos that are royal Haktorah, and the rest, the balance of this Chatos, which are the Evrei Chatos, are Asurim B'Haktorah because of Kol Shemimenu Le'ishim. So what does he do in this case when he has a mixture of Evarei Chatos, which are Asur B'Haktorah, and Evarei Ola, which require Haktorah? What's going to be the solution to this problem? We're going to put all the Evarim onto the Mizbeach, and we're going to view the Basar Chatos, where there's an Isur of Kol Shemimenu Le'ishim, because he's already been maktir that which is royal Haktorah, as if they were eitzim. In other words, once again, he's not going to be mechaven to be maktir them for the sake of Haktorah, but rather l'shem eitzim. And again, we have to be maktir that part because of the takon of the Ola. But aren't we violating the Isur Haktorah of Kol Shemimenu Le'ishim vis-a-vis the Chatos? And the answer is no. Since he doesn't have kavana for Haktorah, but rather l'shem eitzim, there's no Isur Bal Taktiru. And this is derived by Rabbi Lazar from the following pasuk. It says, "V'elam mizbeach lo yalu l'reach nichach." That's the beginning of Sefer Vayikra. The earlier pasuk that we quoted is also pretty early in Sefer Vayikra. Actually, these two psukim call mincha shetakrivu Hashem lo tzasach chametz ki chol sior v'chol bach lo tzakrivu menu ichei Hashem. And the pasuk karban reishis takrivu osam lashevel amizbech lo yalu l'reach nichach. Those two psukim are continuous. So contiguous. Now it says l'reach nichach, and now steps up Rabbi Lazar with the following drasha. Dafka l'reach nichach iatom mala al mizbech. When the pasuk earlier said lo saktiru mimenu, it's only referring to reach nichach. So there are two kinds of akrava on the mizbech. There's one category called reach nichach, and there's another category called eitzim. And since the Torah went out of its way to prohibit lo yalu l'reach nichach, it means l'reach nichach yatamal. The Torah is restricting, limiting the lav of bal taktiru to a reach nichach situation. Aval atamal l'shum eitzim, because eitzim is not considered a reich nichach haktorah. And again, this is all based on the smichus of these two psukim. That after the pasuk Yikol Siora Tetra Saktiru, the Torah says l'reich nichach. So from the first pasuk we learn Kol Shemimenu leishim, and then from the second pasuk we're learning that lo saktiru means lo yalu l'reich nichach, and Rabbi Lazar holds that the mashmos of the pasuk is such that lo saktiru only applies when it's l'reich nichach, but l'shem eitzim it's mutter. Fine. Therefore, he can be mala the shirayim, and even though that should be a violation of bal taktiru vis-a-vis the Eivarei Chatos, nevertheless, if he's master, he makes a t'nai that he's doing it l'shem eitzim, then there's no violation of bal taktiru. The same thing by analogy applies here in the case of a Minchas Yisrael, where the shirayim require achila, and the question is, how could he be maktir the balance after the komets, after the kmitza on the mizbeach? He's not going to violate the Isur Bal Taktiru, because on the tzad that he's Yisrael and it's a Minchas Yisrael is culture mentally ichim, he's already been maktir the kmitza, and therefore the balance beyond the kmitza is a violation of Bal Taktiru. But now we've learned that according to Rabbi Lazar, we're going to limit the Isa, the application, the scope of Bal Taktiru, only to a Haktara, which is called L'Reich Nichach. But if he's going to be Maktir, the Shirayim, L'Shem Eitzim, that's not L'Shem Reich Nichach, that's not included in the Isa of Bal Taktiru, and therefore on the tzad that he's a Kohen, it'll be a real Haktara, but on the side that he's Yisrael and there's an Isra Bal Taktiru, it's going to be not L'Reich Nichach, but rather L'Shem Eitzim. So the Gemara asks the obvious question. That works out according to Rabbi Lazar, who holds that whenever you have a tarovus in Menachos, you can solve the problem by being back to the Shirayim L'Shem Eitzim. El Rabbanon Ma'ikol of Meimar. So the Rabbanon rejected the sheet of Rabbi Lazar as far as every chatos v'oloshin is arvu, and they hold that you cannot be malad them l'shem eitzim. Now, what do you do in a case where you have kachim mizbeach, but you cannot be malad them at all, and the option of l'shem eitzim doesn't exist according to the Rabbanon? Gemara in Tvachim Daf Ayin Zayin, they learn from the pasuk Osam that Dafka Osam, which is Sior Udvash, then it's Mutal Hakav L'Shem Eitzim, but not Shardvarm Shednesru Mishum Kol Shemimenu L'Ishim. So the Isur of Kol Shemimenu L'Ishim according to Rabbanon extends even to include a akrova l'shem eitzim. So now that we don't have the option here of akrova l'shem eitzim, what do? And the Rabbanan come up with the following solution: to ubar tzurasam v'yetzu lebeis hasreifa. What we do here is, and this again is derived from the word osam in that pasuk, and it teaches you that shar dvarim shenesru mishum kol shimenu leishim is you're not allowed to be maktir them on the mizbeach, but what you're allowed to do is a process called to ubar tzurasam, and then v'yetzu lebeis hasreifa. And this is similar to what you have in zvachim of behemos. You have something called yiru ad sheyistavu. Here also, it's to ubar tzurasam, and then we take it out to the beis hasreifa. I mean, the question would be whether taking it out to the beis hasreifa is really a kiyum as far as the carbon ola is concerned, because now we have a tarobes of every chatos and every ola. So as far as the every chatos is concerned, we have an iser bal taktiru, and that applies even if he's makriv l'shem eitzim according to the Rabbanan. And in the case, so that's with regard, let's say we have these two cases. We have every chatos and every ola, and there we have the problem of the every chatos that, since he brought that chelik that he had, that's roy laktar, now he has an iser bal taktiru. And on the other hand, he has to be makayim a tikkun of carbon ola. And then we have another case of a safek kohen, safek Yisrael, in a case of a carbon mincha. What do we do with the shirayim? Because we don't have the option of Rabbi Lazar to be makriv the shirayim as a carbon eitzim with a tanai. And that is because the Chacham hold that the Eastern Bal Taktir applies even to a carbon eitzim. So what do we do with this? So this is the shita of a different Rabbi Elazar, not the Rabbi Elazar that we have here, but Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. So the Gemara asks, how could you be makriv v'taroves? Or shall we say, how could these taroves people, Safek Kohen, Safek Yisrael, how could we makriv their mincha, and specifically the shiarim of the mikvah? Of the mincha. The Gemara now introduces Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. The Ovid law, ki Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, the Sanya Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon Omer. And now we're going to discuss not a carbon nedava, a minchas nedava of a Kohen, but rather a minchas chote shel Kohen. This is based on the concept called carbon olav yored. And if a Kohen becomes chayav in a carbon olav yored, let's say he's an ani, then he brings a carbon minchas. That's called a minchas ote of a Kohen. Now, Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon holds that a minchas ote shel Kohen, as opposed to a classic minchas nadav of a Kohen, has a din of kmitza. And that's based on a pasuk in Vayikra Hey, with regard to minchas chote. The Torah says, "V'hoisal lakohen kib mincha." And Rabbi Shimon in Menachos Daf Ayin Daled darshins that if the chote is a kohen, then the din of his mincha is like that of a minchas Yisrael, and there is kmitza. And the kmitza is karv liatzma, v'ashirayim craven liatzma. So it's not eaten as the shirayim of a minchas Yisrael. The Chachamim reject that. They hold that a minchas kohen choti doesn't have kmitza at all. And our Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon is of the opinion like Rabbi Shimon that a minchas kohen chote is nikmetzes. So the Gemara now says the following, that since according to Rabbi Elazar of Shimon, we derive from that hekesh of kim mincha, that a minchas chote shel kohen has the same din and requirement of kmitz as a minchas Yisrael. Therefore, what do we do with the shirayim? The shirayim cannot be eaten because it's still a minchas kohen, which needs kulei kolit. As the pasuk says, "Kol minchas kohen kolil tia lo tzeyocha." So Rabbi Elazar of Shimon comes up with the following solution, just a very essential category called minchas kohen shel kohen. On the one hand, requires kmitz, as we say, but on the other hand, the shirayim cannot be eaten by the kohen because we need kula kolit. Is therefore kometz karev li atzmo, v'shirayim is pazrim al pnei adeshin. So we put the shirayim underneath lamata bebeis adeshin, the exact place that they would put the trumas adeshin that they took off the mizbeach. And the notza of the carbon oath as well. And we're trying to figure out what is the geder, what is the essential definition of this category called mispazrim al beis hadeshen. And why is that considered, in a sense, a kiyum of kulo kolil? Take the shirayim of this minchas chote shel kohen and put it in the beis hadeshen lamata. Why? How does that solve the problem of kulo kolil? The afilu rabbanon, even the rabbanon who hold that a minchas chote shel kohen is not nikmetzes, but rather it's kula kol maktirin es kula. And the Gemara Menachos Daf Ayin Gimel and Beis explains the time of the Chachamim. The pasuk says, "V'oisal hakohen kimincha makish chovasol linidvasol." It's not a hekesh to a minchas Yisrael to require, so but rather it's a hekesh to a minchas nedava. Even though this is a minchas chova, ma nedava so ein necheles, af chovasa ein necheles. So we're going to have a hekesh now between the minchas kohen chote shel kohen, which is a chova, to the minchas nedava. And just like the minchas nedava is the shirayim are not eaten, but rather there's no kmita. And it's kulei kolil, so too the shiore minchas chote shel kova, by virtue of this equation, ein necholim ela nikmetzes. So the Gemara says, "Afilu rabbanon who hold that a minchas chote shel kohen is not subject to kmitza, but rather maktirin kula. Lo pligi alei the Rabbi Elazar Shimon ela b'minchas chote shel kohen. The bas hakrovin, right? The minchas chote of a kohen, like a minchas nedava, requires kula kolil, requires a hekter aktara for the entire carbon, entire mincha. And that's called a mincha de bas hakrovin, avol hacha, in the case of the mincha, that they were makr for on behalf of this taroves. We don't know if he's a kohen or he's Israel. And now we have the problem of the shiuria mincha, because we don't know if he's a Kohen or Yisrael. If he's Yisrael, it's not Roy Laktar because it's Roy Lachila. It means Achilas Kohen is then it comes under the category of Eino Roy Laktar Klal, because of the fact that he might be Yisrael, and Minchas Yisrael, there's no Aktar on the Shirayim. Here in this case, where it's Eino Roy Laktar Klal, Afilu Rabbanan Modu, even the Rabbanan will accept this principle, if you will, this kiyum of Yispazru al Beis Hadesh, as we saw in Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. He writes here in the note that Lechora Adif Lahakter is Kula Beli Likmot Kla. When here we're saying that the mincha requires a kmitza, and that will burn the mizbech, and that the shirayim are in a state of, let's say, in the case of a Safek Yisrael Safek Kohen, a state of Eino Roy Laktar Klal, we'd say, right? Because we have the problem that if it's a mincha Yisrael, you need achila. So the Aruch LaNer is pointing out that at first glance, we would think that the best idea would be makner's kula, without kmitza. Which means that if he's a Kohen, then that's exactly what he does with his mincha. And even if he's Yisrael, his kevon shlo nikmitza mincha, there was no kmitza. Is ein shirai masur michum kol shemenu ish. So here we get up to the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Kuf Amud Aleph, and Amir Hashem, that's what we'll pick up in the continuation of this shir.